baptism 2 weeks ago, Eucharist last week, and tonight we are talking about the sacrament of holy orders. Now, it's one of the two sacraments of vocation, one being marriage, of course, the other being holy orders, which is the sacrament that I received to become a priest, and deacons become a deacon, and bishops become bishops. So it is the sacrament, that makes, leaders, in the church. So that's what we're going to talk about. How perfect to have this week's gospel, right, be the calling of the disciples, of the apostles. You're all here in this process because God's calling you. God's calling you to think about being baptized or about being confirmed to becoming Catholic. God's calling you to be a sponsor, part of the team. God's calling you just to watch and learn online. We're called here by God, right? To become more like Him and to be His follower. So it's my great honor tonight to be able to welcome Deacon Joe Kest, whose father and my father actually ushered for years together at OLPH growing up. His dad was such a wonderful man, hilarious, and a great guy. So I really was always looking forward to working with Deacon Joe someday. So it's been a blessing to be here. And so since not only priests receive holy orders, but also deacons, thought it made sense to ask Deacon Joe to come and for us to do this together so you can get both perspectives. So join me in welcoming Deacon Joe. Oh, yeah.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to really be here tonight. My calling to the diaconate came through RCIA. I was a sponsor in RCIA, and I heard one of our other deacons, Carl Graham, who's since gone back to God, was talking about deacons in the church. And when I heard him, I said, that's really interesting. I said, I want to talk a little bit more about that, Carl. And sure enough, it led to more and more. And it's ironic because the two people that were running the RCA, like Mary and some other gal, said, we're going to really pray for you, that you discern this call. And they started praying. When they started praying, I was doomed. They had powerful prayers because it went on from there. I started to study, and 4 years later, I was ordained a deacon. So this process means a lot to me because this is where it all started for me as a deacon, through the people that calling me to serve as a deacon. So, okay? Awesome. Thanks, Father Mark, for inviting me.
Oh, it's fun.
And we're going to kind of split the duties, aren't we? You and I, as we're going to put the presentation here of holy orders. And as we go along, I would like to say, Father, you'll be interjecting too as we go along, his comments. And if you have any questions as we go along, something you don't understand, I say something doesn't make sense, stop us and say, hey, explain that a little further, okay? Because we're here to try to learn and to help you learn about what orders, sacrament orders is all about. Okay? So, it's clear? So please don't hesitate to ask questions. Stop us. Okay. So, sacrament of holy orders. Now, you've been talking about sacraments. Father already mentioned you talking about baptism. I'm just going to basically review just something really quick if I can, okay? What is a sacrament? You probably already had this, so if I'm repeating myself or repeating something, just say, we've already heard this, go on, okay?
I probably shared it with them 3/4 of the classes.
Okay.
So they've heard this.
Okay. So this is the first slide that's up here is actually the official definition by the church of what a sacrament is. This is probably the one that maybe Father Mark has told you about, but I've got a new definition that I really like, and I've kind of used this as I minister the sacraments. The deacons can do baptisms and marriage, and this is sort of when I'm talking to people about those sacraments. This is kind of I use this as a background. This definition it was developed by a man named Ted Guzzi. Okay, and it was in a book in 1981. So it's dated. It was probably shortly after Vatican II that this book came out. But it's called the Book of Sacramental Basics. And I really like this definition because to me, a sacrament is really what this is all about. You got that slide up? Mm-hmm. sacrament is a festive action. Yeah, it is, isn't it? When we come together for a baptism or any kind of sacrament, it's a festive action. It's something to really celebrate. We have a good time. And in which Christians assemble to celebrate their lived experience. So that's the big one right there, to celebrate their lived experience. In other words, we can still come together in a vacuum to celebrate a baptism or holy orders or marriage or what. It's because we've lived something, and now we want to celebrate that and bring God into the whole celebration. Baptism, for example, you're celebrating a child's birth. A new child has come into your family, and it's part of your family now. It's a new life that's come into the world, and you want to celebrate that. And so you bring it to the community at church, and you gather together, and you do the prayers and the action of the water and the oils, and then you ask Christ to join us in this celebration. Okay? So see what I'm saying? It's a lived experience that you're coming to celebrate in the sacrament. Holy orders, it's a lived experience of a man taking on a vow of saying, I'm committing my life to Jesus and the church. And so you gather to celebrate that and with the community, and then to call to heart their common story, the story of Jesus, how he came and what he did for us and how he's part of all this. Well, see what I'm saying? This definition to me really sounds like what when I celebrating sacrament really was all about. It's something I've already been there. It's not something new that's popped up all of a sudden. It's something I've already lived and been a part of, but now I want to bring it to God and Jesus and the church and celebrate it. I think that's really something unique. For me, it makes a lot of sense. Okay? So I'm going to dwell on this. This is a little something I want to share with you. Okay? So, sacrament of the church. Like Father had mentioned, there's the 7 sacraments, and you guys have heard this already. And like he said, the sacraments of vocation and service, matrimony and holy orders. Okay? Marriage, clergy, holy orders. Okay? Or marriage life. All right. So those are the 2 vocation sacraments. Okay? Sacrament of holy orders. This is kind of a nice definition. I like this. Holy orders is a sacrament through which the mission entrusted by Christ to his apostles continues to be exercised in the church until the end of time. This is a sacrament of apostolic ministry. And we'll break this open more as we go through the presentation, okay? But that's basically what it's saying. It's the sacrament we celebrate now that Jesus brought to us when he was here on earth, and when he was the apostles and carried that on to the bishops. And we'll see all that, okay? And so, like I said, it includes 3 degrees: the episcopate, the bishop, the presbyterate, the priest, and the diaconate, the deacon. Those are the 3 orders in the sacrament of orders. All right. So let's start at the beginning. Okay? Who's the chief priest of all of us? It's Jesus Christ, right? We know he was here. He's the main guy that brought all this about. He is the priest, the true priest, the source of all ministry in our church is Jesus Christ.
A priest, in the Jewish sense, is someone who would be that mediator between God and people. The priest was the person in the temple, right, that would take the sacrifice. But basically, the people thought that whenever they did anything wrong, that God was just ticked off and ready to throw lightning bolts and kill them. They were primitive, you know, and so they thought, well, let's burn a bunch of animals so that God's not pissed at us anymore. Excuse me, but I mean, I'm sorry, I think it was that kind of raw language, though, in a broad stroke. And then they were the people that be able to then make the sacrifice to bring the people back to God and have God accept them. So we say that Jesus is the priest because it was his self-sacrifice that said, okay, people are all the way back to God. And now individually, all we have to do is make our own self-sacrifices, right? And to be able to live and desire a union with God. We don't have to burn anything anymore. We just have to be able to sacrifice ourselves in love, which any of us do for a relationship with anybody.
Right.
You know, because you don't love anyone without sacrifice. That's what love is. You know, and so I think that's maybe one way to think about Jesus as the priest. So not so much collar and male, but you know, because Jesus, you know, had a male body, but he was God, and it was just all of that. He's the one that we can go to God through now.
Right. Thanks, brother.
Sure.
Good definition.
I just want to be able to pull my weight.
No, that's very good. That's exactly what it's all about.
As if you were afraid that I wouldn't have anything to say.
Okay, next slide then, John. Okay, so that Jesus, as we heard in the scriptures, at the Last Supper especially, he came to serve, not be served. So there's that service aspect of Jesus. That was one of the things he did the whole time he was here with us on this earth. He came to serve. He always said that. Okay? So the next slide then, John. We always refer to Jesus as a good shepherd. And that's what we refer to our priests even today as shepherds of the flock. You know, they bring the word, they lead us into our faith, into who God is and what God's all about. So we term that as the good shepherd, just like the shepherd in the scriptures, like Jesus is termed the good shepherd. At the Last Supper, Jesus took the bread and the wine, and he said, take this and eat, take this and drink, and then do this in memory of me. So that was the sacramental part of the orders is Jesus, the way he created the Eucharist, okay? And today, the priest, even today, who celebrates the Eucharist with us, right? That's the thing. Jesus said, do this in memory of me, and that's exactly what Father does every time he comes to celebrate Mass with us, okay? So that's another aspect of it. So Jesus, while he was here on earth, some, 33 years, spent a lot of time with the apostles, showing them, teaching them, helping them to understand what God was all about, how much God loved us, and to share that whole thing with us, that whole concept of God. And he did this around with his 12 disciples. Those were his apostles, his disciples. And he gave them the authority over unclean spirits to drive them out, and to cure every disease and every illness. He gave them that power as he taught them about what it was all about to be a follower of himself, Jesus. And he commissioned those 12 before he went back to heaven, before he descended. He sent out the 12 after instructing them. Kingdom of God is at hand, cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, and drive out demons. Jesus commissioned those 12 to do that very work. All right? Okay.
In the last words, he said, right before, he rose up to heaven, go therefore, is that coming up? Is that coming up? I don't want to steal your thunder. No, but he said, right, the last thing, the gospel for the baptism rite is the last thing that Jesus says before he goes up to heaven is go therefore and baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
I mean, so really, he commissioned them to make new Christians through baptism.
Yeah. At that point, I'm not sure they understood what that meant, what baptism was all about, but that sort of came later. But right, at least commission them to go out and make sure that they bring everybody to be Christians, teach them what it means to be a Christian. And that's what the apostles did. Okay? And at the Last Supper, do this in memory of me. We told them that, right? And to carry on that work, and we'll talk more about that. Okay, so Jesus then ascended to the Father. Look at that slide. Okay, he's got it. I'm on the page here. Okay, so now he's gone. Okay, he did all this work while he was here for 33 years, teaching and healing and doing all that kind of thing. Now he's gone back to the Father. And he's left his apostles. He's commissioned them, those 12 apostles, and he's left them to carry on all the work that Jesus had started while he was here on earth. Okay? That's what he did. And that's what they did. They went out after Jesus left and went back home. They started teaching all that Jesus had taught them. Okay? And really it was in the priesthood of the baptized. I probably jumped the gun here a little bit. I shouldn't go so far up here, but that's what all the baptized are called to be, and that's what the apostles were teaching the people. Go out and do the work that Jesus taught us, and they were teaching the people that. Okay, and the priesthood of the baptized is you're a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people of His own. You may announce the praise of Him who called you out of darkness with His wonderful light. That's what it was all about, and that's what the apostles were teaching. Okay. Go out and proclaim the kingdom of God that Jesus brought here while he was here on earth. And that's what the early church was commissioned to do, to carry on that work that Christ had left the apostles in charge. And the apostles, of course, then spread out and had all the different communities they formed, and little small churches, communities of the faith, and they were the leaders of those little communities. And that's what the apostles did.
Common priesthood seems very formal. And it seems very far away. But if priesthood is bringing someone to God, every one of you who have tried to teach a child, you know, about God, read them a Bible story, taught them a prayer, brought them to church, helped them to pray grace before meal, told them that God loved them and it's okay when you tuck them in that Jesus will protect you, teach them anytime. All of that is common priesthood. All of that is being people who will let people know that there's a God. Every time that any one of us has called someone who's alone or sick or elderly or visited them and said, I'm so glad to see you, and either said that God loves you or just that I love you, we have been God for people because God is love. And I think that that's what, so priesthood is, even though it's kind of a both and. We do have a particular priesthood and diaconate because there's got to be a structure in the church, and we have sacraments, you know, and that God uses and gives us special graces because of the office, not because we aren't as, at least I'm not as much of an idiot as anyone else, you know, because it's not us as people, it is the grace, but there's a common priesthood that the work of Jesus is for all of us.
Right. And I think that's what the apostles were teaching.
Right.
They didn't have priests and deacons and all that stuff in those days. It was just the 12 apostles going out and teaching all of us, the baptized, as like Father said, we're all called to do what Jesus Christ's work was when he was here. All of us, that means for baptism. We're called to that obligation.
Deacon Joe, I don't mean to throw something in here, but
Uh-huh.
so Saint Stephen, he's known as like the first deacon, correct?
Yeah.
So how did that happen? Like how did he become the first deacon in the church?
Well, it comes a little bit later in the apostles, because the apostles were the main guys after Christ went back to heaven. But they found that they were kind of getting overwhelmed with
Yeah.
all the work they had to do. After all, Christianity was really expanding in those days. It was taking off. And the apostles felt they needed some help. And so they said, we need to find seven men of reputable stature, I think the words are.
I'm so glad they didn't say that when it was time for me to go to priesthood.
Yeah.
I don't know how reputable my
Right.
situation was.
And so they went and selected 7 men, and they appointed them to really wait on tables, and that's a term would be very general, but they were to help the apostles do some of the menial tasks that they had to do. So the apostles could go forth and really do the big work. The deacons were called to handle like ministering to the widows and things like that, okay? That's how it all started.
So a lot of literally serving at the table, because Eucharist was often a meal in those days, and literally taking care of the sick, which was often the orphans and the widows, like you said.
Yes, right, yeah.
Right.
So the apostles could do the big thing of the preaching and the word, getting it out. Okay, does that answer that, John?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so like the next slide there shows the apostles out. See, they're out there doing the teaching, talking to the people, doing the sanctifying, the governing, show them what Christ was all about, and how they were called to do what Jesus' work was. So anyway, like I said, holy is the sacrament to which the mission entrusted by Christ to the apostles continue to be exercised in the church till the end of time. Okay? But what happened? I mean, Christianity grew and just exploded after Jesus left, and the apostles were out teaching and preaching and doing all this good work, and all of a sudden they got to the point where they just couldn't handle it. There was just too much going on. And so they decided, the 12 apostles got together and said, we need to get some help here. And so what we're going to start doing is laying on of hands, which is the way of commissioning, or ordaining, commissioning somebody. They lay on hands of these men. Certain men were picked to carry on the apostolic work that they were doing. Okay, so somebody needs some help here. Okay, and so that's what happened. And the apostles laying on hands, new leaders were chosen then to help them to preach and teach and to lead the Christian communities. And so they were the first bishops that were commissioned. Okay. That's where the order of bishop came from. And this is probably where the sacrament was really created right here, is when the first guy was brought forth to the apostles, and the apostles laid hands on him and commissioned that person to carry on the work of communities. Like I said, all these bishops, all these apostles went off to different communities. They didn't stay together. They were all each led a community of faith and believers, okay? Which is where where the true bishop comes from, because he's the leader, the faith leader of a community of Christians. Right?
So I think it's interesting in this, the first people who were ordained per se were bishops. Because even today, now remember, you know how, what I always say, we're telling you the story of the Catholic faith, right? Every faith has a language and a history, you know, but for us, the bishops came first. There, we still believe that they're descendants of the apostles. And again, that is our self-understanding of ourselves. And I don't mean that to be any disrespect to other, you know, faiths, but that's how kind of we see it, you know, as Catholics, and they came first. Technically speaking, the only person in the Diocese of Toledo that has the office or the authority to pray the Mass or any sacrament is Bishop Thomas. I have permission, and I literally have, what's the word? Orders of, we said it today. I have my faculties, but maybe not my faculties of my brain to remember, but no, I have literally, a priest or deacon has faculties given to us by our bishop, because the authority, if you want to be technical, all comes through the bishop. So that if I'm asked to witness a marriage in Indiana or another diocese in Ohio, I need to get permission from their bishop.
Which is just a really, we were talking earlier, I just found it to be really interesting at how the bishop is the only one that has the authority to administer sacraments in the diocese, but he has given permission to the priests and deacons to be that extension in his diocese.
Yeah.
So,
We'll see that in a minute.
so they're obedient
Yeah.
to the bishop of this diocese. And that's kind of how it's all intertwined. So the bishops, like, are all, like, they're the apostles of the modern day.
Yep.
Governing the people and helping bringing them to Jesus. And the priests are an extension of their ministry.
So if I go to San Antonio and then I have Mass there with permission, when it comes to the Eucharistic prayer, I don't say Bishop Thomas, I say whoever that bishop is there.
Yeah.
You know, so that's kind of how it is.
Yeah.
Now, some of this is structural, I know, but also some of this is kind of what's different than the faith that some of you come from. And again, and I think it's part of our spirituality helps with the language.
Okay, the next slide, sort of, it's a diagram, shows what we just talked about. Okay, Jesus was the original of all the preaching, teaching, and all that, the witnessing, okay? And then he passed that on, see, he taught his apostles, teachings of Christ, taught his apostles, these flowcharts are cool, I think you guys in the flowcharts. He taught his apostles, and then the apostles then, through the laying on of hands of other men, and created all the bishops, the order of bishops, okay? And then they spread out to all the different communities that they started, okay? And Christianity was growing tremendously in those days, of course, okay? So the bishop is, like we all just said, is a true, received the tradition of the church, teaching and liturgy, and his job is to hand that on to the whole community that he's in charge of, okay? That's his main authority, and that's what he does. All right, now,
In the Diocese of Toledo, do you guys know how many parishes there are that he's in charge of?
160, is it, something like that?
Yeah, it was 164,
Yeah.
and I don't know if that was before or after they closed some. But I think it's around 100, and, well, there might be less, because we only have like 80 active priests now. For the first time. You're right, it's a lot of times, you know.
But still over 100 parishes that he's in charge
Oh,
of.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the whole sacrament of holy orders is for the ordained, laying on of hands, that's the symbol of the conferring of power to the man, of the bishop, and then from on down, the bishop and priest and deacon. But the bishop, this is what's kind of neat, the bishop has the full effect of the sacrament of holy orders. The bishop, priest, deacon, he has the full power,
That's
he
right.
has it all. In fact, the bishop, when
Comes
he's
to
saying,
spiritual power.
spiritual power, yeah, when he's saying mass, the bishop will wear the chasuble, which is the priest's vestment, He also wears the deacon vestment underneath that. You know that? The dalmatic, he wears a dalmatic under that too. He's distinguishing that he has all of those.
No wonder he's always sweating.
Yeah. He has all those vestments on to signify.
It's not even a deacon stole, it's a dalmatic?
Dalmatic. He has a dalmatic underneath his chasuble.
I'm so glad I'm not a bishop.
Because he has the full effect of the sacrament. He's the
I don't know, maybe I lose weight, all that sweat.
I don't know.
Well, I didn't know, but I didn't know that. And so then, and then he has the bishop's cross,
Yeah.
and then the zucchetta,
Yeah.
the little beanie.
Yeah.
You know.
He's got scrozier and mitre and all
Right,
that
the
good
mitre,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, he's got all that good stuff. Okay, so the bishop is the big guy, okay? He's the chief of it. And it comes from the Greek word episkopos, which means overseer, which he is. He's the overseer. The bishop is the overseer of the whole diocese, the whole community, which is the Diocese of Toledo, in this case. He's the leader of the faith community, head of the diocese, the teacher of the teachers. He's the big guy of all of it. And the Diocese of Toledo, like Father Mark said, there's a Bishop Daniel Thomas, okay? And he's the direct descendant of the apostles by apostolic succession, by the laying out of hands from the original apostles down. He's in succession to all of that, okay? He's a part of that.
The teacher of the teachers,
Teacher of the teachers.
which means he's the interpreter, the official interpreter of the faith that has been passed down to us. So,
Right.
if a particular pastor in a particular parish who was installed for the Holy Spirit to work through him, if I preach something that some people in the parish think, I think Father Mark is preaching something that is not church teaching, you know, that really is not, that his interpretation is really not lined up, then they ultimately might go to the bishop, and the bishop would break the tie. You know, either be able to say, no, you know, Father, you really, that interpretation is confusing people, that's really not what we believe, or, yes, it is.
Yeah. Because he's the teacher.
So
of the teachers,
he's
yeah.
the official,
He's the official word, yeah, yeah, doctrine and stuff, yeah. And another thing we have that maybe we don't have right now is called the auxiliary bishop.
right,
At one point, we did have our bishop, then we had what we called the auxiliary bishop, was Bishop Donnelly in those days.
like a helper bishop to help with confirmation.
Yeah, but he's actually a bishop of a small diocese somewhere, could be over in the third
Yeah.
world or something.
That has
Yeah.
not, that's
Yeah.
been suppressed.
Yeah.
So it used to be a diocese, but it was closed, but they still have the opening for him to be there.
He's a bishop, but he's just a helper for the bishop of our diocese, okay, the auxiliary bishop, they call him. But right now, like I said, we
And
don't
if
have.
you were Chicago or New York,
No,
and the bishop wanted to do a lot of the confirmations himself, then it would be really helpful to have at least one auxiliary bishop
Yeah.
to even help with bishop things.
Yeah. Wasn't our bishop an auxiliary bishop from Philadelphia? When he came
Yes, he
here?
was.
Yeah.
He was in charge of the media, he
Yeah.
was.
Yeah, so our Bishop Tom was an auxiliary bishop before he became our bishop in Toledo. So, just another term. So, okay, so the sacrament of holy orders, our beloved bishop is Pope Francis. He is a bishop of Rome, okay? So he is a bishop of Rome, but he is the bishop of bishops. Okay, he's sort of the leader of the church, the Catholic faith, the Catholic church. But he is truly a bishop himself. But they really don't say he's reporting to anybody. It's more of a collaboration of anything. All the
One thing I
bishops.
always thought that was interesting was that Pope is not another type of level, you know, and Cardinal isn't either. The Pope picks some bishops to become either archbishops or cardinals, usually depending on what diocese they have, and then whoever is named the Bishop of Rome, and they're always a cardinal, they're automatically the Pope, because, you know, the Rome was the center of the Roman Empire and the center of the church for many years. So that's just, so it's not like, you know, there's a ceremony, but really, it's whoever gets picked for the Bishop of Rome.
Right, yep.
Take care.
Okay, you guys have a good.
Yeah.
Okay, the next picture then.
Oh, Andrew,
What's the difference between bishops and cardinals?
so a bishop whoever is named Bishop of Toledo is going to be a bishop. But someone who is named the Bishop of Cincinnati is an archbishop, because that Cincinnati bishop is the one who kind of convenes the other 5 bishops in Ohio. You see, so that a cardinal is a bishop that's named to be a cardinal by the Pope himself. And the cardinal usually is in New York or Chicago or a very large diocese. Do you see what I mean? It kind of depends on where you are. And it's the cardinals, Andrew, 200 some of them, that elect the Pope.
So is that the only role of a cardinal? Is that, or is there a reason someone becomes a cardinal other than to be part of the group that elects the Pope?
So in general, bishops are all the same. In theory, the Pope leads the church with all of the cardinals and all of the bishops throughout the world. They're all really bishops, but just not for hierarchy like they report to one another, but for structure and communication. You know, an archbishop is under a few bishops. You know, there's a cardinal with a few archbishops reporting to him, and then the cardinals report right to the Holy Father. Do you see what I mean? It's just kind of the structure. So there's a cardinal in New York, there's a cardinal in Philadelphia usually, there's a cardinal in Chicago, in Los Angeles, you know.
Right now?
Yes, usually one in Detroit.
But he's an archbishop right now.
He's not a cardinal yet.
The one in Detroit, I believe, is Archbishop Vignano.
Right. So some of this is kind of just the way the structure is, how they report and disseminate, you know, information.
But that's really the only distinction between them?
Yeah, there isn't like extra, there may be an installation ceremony, but it isn't another level of orders.
That's it.
Yeah, it really depends, it's bishop, but then, and it depends on where you serve and what kind of diocese you have. And then the cardinals though, and you know, and then you wear red, they often call cardinals with the red hats, you know, does he get the red hat? Then the cardinal is really very important, that they represent the whole world and elect the Holy Father. So,
One of them could be the Holy Father. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And the Holy Father, Pope Francis, is from Argentina. And there's a lot of poor people in Argentina, and he's the first Pope ever from the Southern Hemisphere. And one thing that he is doing, he is naming cardinals from throughout the world, from little countries and areas that have never had cardinals before, because he wants it to be more global and universal.
Now, couldn't a priest actually be or elected the Pope as well? It doesn't have to be a cardinal? It's not ideal.
A layperson.
Could be a layperson.
Right, they can name anyone a pope.
Yeah.
Right.
And back in the early church, sometimes they named people a bishop before they were ordained.
Yeah.
You know, because they were starting out, you know.
I mean, it's not very likely nowadays, but.
Right.
Yeah, but you don't have to be ordained to be a cardinal. Which is probably never happened,
Right.
but still.
Cliff,
What is the mechanics if the Pope dies?
so when I was 18 years old, and going to Notre Dame as my freshman year, I was clueless. One day in October, all the bells were ringing in the middle of the afternoon. And I found out a Pope was elected, right? Pope John Paul I. And then 2 months later, the bells went off again. And of course I was clueless. I didn't know that that guy had died. You know, that Holy Father, you know, had died. And then John Paul II was elected. So when one Pope passes, then they convene the cardinals again, and then they go to the Sistine Chapel, where Michelangelo has the ceiling that's famous, and they elect a Pope. And what they do is, they all vote, and it has to be a certain percentage, maybe like 2/3, I think. And if they burn the ashes of the ballots, and they do not have enough for a Pope, the smoke is gray. but then they put something in the smoke. What color is it if they elect a pope?
White.
White. So that's how everyone knows that a pope's elected. So Saint Benedict, he will be, Pope Benedict, Cliff, by retiring, big difference, by retiring, he set a precedent that goes back 700 years about a pope not having to die in office. People are living longer, and I personally think that Pope Benedict saw Pope John Paul II getting older and realizing that he was not capable, and so that wasn't the greatest structure, so then he brought back that practice, which I think is so wise for them to be, for that Pope, not to have to, when he's not able to be able to really communicate and lead, that he's gonna be able to say, it's time to let someone else.
Set a precedent there.
Yeah, he
For
did.
sure.
And God picked him perfectly because he was the head of the doctrine of the faith. He knew the teachings of the church more than anybody alive, even today. And so no one, no matter where you are on the spectrum of Catholicism, nobody in the world would ever accuse Pope Benedict of not knowing the faith. And so he's probably one of the only people in my time that would have kind of gotten away with it, if you will. Yeah. And that's how just awesome, because we believe the Holy Spirit works in all this. I mean, there's mechanics, but that's how, and remember, cardinals and bishops, and popes, part of their job is to kind of run the church and lead the church and administrate. That is an entirely different kind of vocation than it is to be a prophet, or a preacher, and some of them are that too, but that's why everyone has their own kind of call.
Okay. And the beloved bishop, Thomas, he's the current bishop of the Diocese of Toledo, which is, his job is to lead us all in our faith. That's what he's ordained to do. The role of teaching and sanctifying and governing. Okay, but what happens? The Diocese of Toledo is a pretty good sized diocese, okay? And so, like Father Mark had alluded to, he starts sharing some of the charisms he has of teaching and preaching and serving. And this is where the priest and the deacon come in, okay? Because it's such a vast number of people and the bishop can't be everywhere, he starts delegating some of his authority to the priest and to the deacon to help out. And like I say, the bishop has these charisms of Jesus Christ, which is to preach and sanctify, and then also to serve. Okay, those are the charisms that Jesus passed on to the apostles. And now the bishop, he wants to have those in the parish, and so he helps divide some of those charisms and delegate them to other people to help. Okay, that's what the priest and the deacon come in. That's what this neat flow chart kind of indicates then. Okay, so the priest preaches and teaches and offers mass in the name of the bishop. That's what Father Mark said. He gets his authority from the bishop. And the deacon serves, he's a service aspect of the bishop, and he serves in the name of the bishop. Okay, so those are the persons that we bring as a priest and as a deacon to the particular parish. Okay, just to help the bishop. There's no way he could do it all. Okay, so you have the sacrament, you have the priest, the presbyterate, which comes from the Greek word presbyteros, means elder. Some people have church with elders, right? And some of the roles in your church. But he's the local parish representative of the bishop. He has the bishop's authority in that particular parish, which in this case is St. Pat's of Pentagonals. Okay? But so we have that he presides at the Eucharist in the name of the bishop. That's what Father Mark does. And he's accountable to the bishop. He can't just go off and, like he said, do whatever you want. If he teaches something that's erroneous, the bishop's going to come down on it real quick because he's accountable to the bishop, and he has responsibility from the bishop and obedience to the bishop on all those.
And the bishop is responsible to pass on the faith that was given to us. They're accountants, they're not prophets. And I don't mean that pejorative to be like like a put down. But like I think people want, well, the bishop should just change things. They're not able to because they're the teachers of the teachers, they pass on. But oftentimes, people, lots of changes have come into the church because the people accept things and things just kind of, the Holy Spirit works. The church, the church when it has changed over time, it never changes from the top down. It changes, the Holy Spirit's working in people and then the bishops recognize the Holy Spirit's work.
Now, we just go back to that previous slide, I want to point out something. You notice the stole, which is the symbol of the authority of the priest or the deacon. The priest's stole is, he wears around his neck, and it comes straight down, okay? And then you'll see the difference between that and the deacon's stole. And that's, the stole is the symbol of the authority of the man that's wearing it, in this case.
Or the office.
The office.
I don't like authority.
Office, yes.
Isn't that true?
That's a better
No,
word.
but I mean, I think it's our role,
Yeah.
because remember, it's a common priesthood of all of us. We just play a certain role. Someone's gonna have to be able to help with the sacraments, and that's our job. But but we're all called, you know, to bring people together.
You're called to be the leaders, yeah, right. Okay, but just to show you that, okay? John, get the next one then. And of course, our beloved pastor, Mark,
You poor people.
We're gonna skip that one quick.
I'm so glad you're merciful.
he is a representative of the bishop in our parish here at St. Pat's. Now, the priest, there's a picture here. The priest has really a special charism, I guess what you call it, whether that's the right word, Mary, I'm using it, that the deacons don't get, just the priest. And this is called Sacerdos Alter Christus, which means he is another Christ. When he's ordained as Father Mark, he's actually, when he's celebrating the Mass or doing his ministry duty, he's just like Jesus Christ being present with us. And that's a powerful symbol when you think about it. So when he's saying Mass, that's just like Jesus Christ standing there saying the Mass with us, just like he did the Last Supper. He's celebrating the Eucharist right with us, and that's actually Jesus.
And you play, remember, this is theological language. This is sacramental language.
Yes.
Because remember, we're all to be we're all to be like Christ, right? And that was baptism.
Right.
And remember, we're Eucharist, we want to become what we eat. Those prayers are always the, so all of us are aspiring to be like Christ, but sacramentally, in our understanding of our system that God gave us, that you notice when the priest, again, you know how the bread and the wine stays the same, and then Jesus, you know, the Spirit attaches, you know, and then it becomes, well, the priest is, and then we're still people, we're still like anybody else, but there is that special grace, you know, in Spirit that's given to us in our office, in this priesthood, that allows us to play the role, and Jesus uses us as himself in the sacraments. Because when you go to reconciliation and the priest puts the stole and the alb, you don't, people say, well, why do I have to confess to a priest? That's next week, by the way. But why do you have to confess to a priest? You're not confessing to a priest. You really are confessing to Jesus in the sacrament. And I'm telling you, I talked to someone last night whose husband I had talked to like a year ago, couldn't remember a darn thing about his situation. I'm telling you, we don't remember. I mean, it is, but more importantly, we play the role of Jesus. You notice, the priest at the Eucharist or prayer does not say, do this in remembrance of Jesus. It says, do this in remembrance of me. And so we play that role. That's part of this ritual in this God's grace. And I'm telling you, here's the truth. The truth is, time after time again, people have come up to me over the years and said, Father Mark, you said today in your homily exactly what I needed to hear. And when they told me what they got out of it, that was nowhere near my mind in the words that I said. I mean, there really is God. When people come and wanting and open to God's grace and believing that God is present, it's all God's work. And I don't mean that to be overly humble. Any gifts I had came from God anyway, but it's just, but I'm telling you, it is honest to say, a lot of times I just go and do my best and bungle along like everybody else. But because of the power of this calling and this office and the people's belief in it, grace is like taken from us and uses us. You know, of course, we have to do everything we can to be humble and do everything we can to nurture the Spirit in us. But it really is God's work.
Yeah, I think one of the most beautiful things is that, you know, like just like a married couple, like through the sacrament of matrimony, we receive graces to live out our marriage to one another and to love one another. Like through the priest or the deacon's ordination, they receive the grace to, like, no matter how imperfect they are, to act. Like another word for it also is in persona Christi, in the person of Christ. And so when they, no matter how imperfect, like I remember like when the sex scandals in the church got so bad and a lot of people had received sacraments or things from these priests and they're like, man, like, did I received it from this terrible person, like, is it all wrong and invalid?
Esperanto prata, do you remember the Latin
I
for
don't.
that? Go ahead, Chad.
But in those situations, I mean, it doesn't matter how imperfect the person is. When they are administering a sacrament, they're not doing it as Mark. They're doing it in the person of Jesus through the office that they have received. That's
So
why
any of
ordination is so important.
So those sacraments are valid.
Are completely
You know,
valid.
because God still works, which to me says that God uses all of us. No matter what we deal with, when we try to love our kids or our neighbors or our family, God loves through imperfect people. Because if He didn't, there would be no love in the world. I mean, it's just the way it is. But I think it's experante per. There's a Latin phrase that says that God uses. If you say the words right, we're guaranteed that God shows up.
Neat stuff. But I've also noticed, if you really listen to the prayers, the Eucharistic prayers in the Mass, especially the consecration, it's in the first person. When you're saying, this is my body, you're saying in that first person, which means that's Christ speaking to us. When you're saying that.
I know how badly, no matter how poorly someone enunciates it, like if I had to do, can you imagine, I don't do language. If I had to do it in another language in another country, I'd be awful. It's hard enough to preach in this language in my culture, but God would still be present though.
Yeah.
That's what the miracle of this is.
Yeah. Okay, so we go on to the next one, the deacon. Okay, again, this comes from the Greek word diakonia, which means service. That's right. Makes sense, right? And that's what the deacon is all about. It's in a ministry of service to the community. Not that the father doesn't have. The father does it too, but the deacon is also there to help father in that. And we're ministers of the word, the altar, and of charity. The deacon is best in his role when he's serving the people. We'll see that in a minute, taking food to working the food bank or working out with the people in doing charitable work. That's where the deacon really shines. And not on the altar so much, but when you're out doing God's work.
But
service.
with fewer priests, then deacons have been a great gift because of being able to pray baptisms and witness marriages.
Because of the shortage of priests, we've taken some of the things that the priests normally would do, and just because of that, that's not our primary role. Our primary role is a service role to the community. Okay. And so the next chart there, what's the stole? Notice the stole for the deacon now comes across on the left shoulder, across. That's the symbol of the office of the deacon. It's not the straight down to the neck like the priest is. So, okay. And you can see the sacrament of there is primary role service. Because of the priest shortage, we have to help them do some other things too. But our
Cliff.
primary role is.
Cliff has a question.
Oh,
Excuse
I'm so
me.
sorry.
Sorry, Cliff.
Why can't the deacon marry?
Well, we can marry. In fact, I was married when I was ordained.
Okay.
You can even if a wife dies. See, when you're ordained as a deacon, you may not be familiar with this.
Now, my kid, if you're married,
Yep.
can you become a deacon?
A deacon, yes, not a
I
priest.
said, when your wife dies,
Yep.
you cannot remarry, right?
Right.
Correct.
Because the deacon takes an oath of what they call limited celibacy. I was married when, so I wasn't celibate, I was ordained, my wife died,
Right,
and because I took an oath of limited celibacy, which says I cannot remarry if my wife dies.
thank you.
Yeah. And it's, I don't know, it's, there have been some deacons that have remarried, that they've been, I think John Paul II was granting those. When Benedict came in, he stopped it, but there was, at one time, the Pope was giving some dispensation from celibacy for deacons. And mainly, it's mainly a role when the deacon has small children or something like that. There's no way they're gonna keep him from having another mother for those children, so that was a special cases.
I think how I look at this is when you receive the graces of holy orders, once you are ordained, then you are not able to allowed to enter to marriage. I've often wondered if part of that was when a priest or deacon preaches or ministers, oftentimes God's grace goes through them. And that would be possible, for them to maybe misuse that, or to just be able to say, if you're already in the state of marriage, when you go into the permanent diaconate, then you can, right? But if you're already received holy orders, then you don't go into the other sacrament of vocation. It's just, guys, this doesn't have to make sense. To see a lot of the things in the church's tradition and our liturgical language isn't necessarily in modern American culture. It's just kind of the way that what we have been given. We have been given a male celibate priesthood. That's what's been passed down to us. Celibacy for priests is, up until the 1200s, there were married priests, but then it's a discipline that we have taken on since then. And that's just the way when the church split, other denominations, have had pastors that are married and even women pastors. But what has been passed down to us, in our Catholic Church is a priesthood, that is celibate so that we can give all our time. I'm telling you, people romanticize, everything would be so wonderful if priests could marry, but it would take more than one married priest to do what, a celibate priest can do, because I can be here all day, because you're my family. I mean, so my need, it's kind of like it's a different kind, of vocation. It's not that I have to make sure that I have time for my wife and my own children. And I think it's the same thing with our Catholic priesthood being male. Jesus was male, the early apostles were male, the bishops were, and that's just what was passed down to us. Remember I said the bishops were not prophets, they were kind of, I don't mean this disrespectfully, I don't know another word, they are accountants, they're teachers, they're passing on what was given to us. They don't make up things, new, they pass down. And we trust that God has been in them, for us.
Like I told Father earlier, probably one of the hardest parts of my diaconate was when I was married, had a job, and a family, and a church. Three of those things, you try to spread your time across all of those, when they're all demanding you have to be here for doing this and doing that. That was one of the toughest times of the diaconate. But now my wife is, of course, deceased, my kids are all married and gone, so I don't have that in the family anymore, so I've got just a church, just like Father now. And it's so much easier to miss, I can devote all my time to the church work. But it was tough, and I can understand, especially in a priest, as much as they're committed to the community, much more than the deacon is. It would be awfully difficult for it to be a married priest.
but not impossible. But, and you may know, do you know the one exception in which there are a few married Catholic priests? Do you know how that comes about? They're exceptional, but they're just a few. So, if there is a married minister that is Lutheran or Episcopalian, if the Catholic Church recognizes the ordination of a certain denomination, and I don't know which is which, so if they say, here's an Episcopal priest, we recognize their ordination because they're already married, and if they are called to join the Catholic Church, and then there's some training, whatever, then since we recognize their ordination, being already married, then, they're oftentimes, able to be a Catholic priest if they convert to Catholicism.
Pastor, though.
Yeah,
Not a pastor.
but yeah, we talked about that, usually not a pastor.
Okay, the next slide there, you'll see, one before that, John, yeah, you'll see it's Jesus washing the feet of the disciples, remember it was the Last Supper, and that was his way of connecting the Eucharist, the body and blood of Christ, with the service aspect, he came to serve and not be served, that was a lesson to his disciples, that, it's just not about the Last Supper, the body and blood of Christ, but also the service aspect of the Eucharist, that's what usually Eucharist is all about. It's going out and serving Jesus and serving his people. And then you bring it to the Eucharist and celebrate that. And so that role of service associated with the Last Supper then is if you look at the Mass, when we're celebrating Mass, we have the deacons with the priest, okay? And there's a couple things here I want to bring about this. First of all, the priest is the primary celebrant. He's the one that brings the body and blood of Christ, okay? The deacon is there perhaps as a reminder of the service aspect of the Eucharist, okay? But also, more importantly, remember the bishop, right? The bishop is the primary celebrant for the Mass. And he has all those charisms of the make holy, the body and blood of Christ, and the service. And so the deacon being there sort of completes that, so those three charisms of the bishop are all present at the Mass, even though it's in the parish. Now, if the bishop were here celebrating Mass, the deacon you wouldn't need the deacon there, because the bishop has all those charisms, okay? But the deacon is usually there just to assist, and again, the service aspect of serving the bishop, okay? But you'll also notice this picture right here, showing the priest and the two deacons, is our bishop would frown on this, and I don't blame him. The reason being is, it looks like the two deacons are part of the celebration of celebrating the Eucharist, and we're really not. It's not part of our role. The priest is the primary celebrant of the sacrament, not the deacon. The deacons, in fact, our bishop has instructed us as deacons to either stay toward the back, which if you watch me when I'm serving at Mass, I'll stay toward the back of the chair and face out toward the priest, looking at the priest, not straight face out. Facing straight out like that, there's a misconception that we're also celebrating with the priest, and we're not. It's a misconception. In fact, in a lot of times, if the bishop is here celebrating, the deacon will be off to the side. He won't even sit down near
So
the
all
altar.
the other priests.
Yeah. So,
And so we always try to have a balance between making sure that people know what the priests do, the deacons do different than the laity, but at the same time recognize we're all doing it together. It's after 8, John. Should we take a break?
I think
How many
We
more
are.
slides?
we are,
I think we're done.
we are just about done.
I don't mean to be rude, I just wanted to
That
make
was-
sure.
That was the last slide, yeah. That one about the sacrament of the priest and deacons.
Does anybody have any initial questions that come to mind right now for either Father Mark or Deacon Joe before we take a short break? All right, great. Well, let's take a short break and then we'll come back and we'll jump into a short activity that we have and then questions. So if you have any questions,
Transitional.
think about them and we will
Yeah, we'll let them ask.
we will come back and we will dive into those questions. So, take about 3 minutes and then we'll be back. Deacon Joe, Father, thank you so much.
Thank you.